Hello, welcome to this Composable New World workshop edition. I'm really happy to be here in person with all of you. It's this feeling of being able to see your reactions, especially to my joke. Thank you for the other person that left. But it's really cool to be here once again and finally be able to match the Twitter faces with the real faces. So thank you. Before I start, thank you, DroidCon, and thank you all for coming here to my screen. Can you see my screen? So, who am I? My name is Carlos Mota. I'm from Portugal. You can find me on Twitter at @CFonsMota. I've created a code lab for this workshop. I've already tweeted it, and I'm going to show you the link afterwards. I'm an Android GD. I've been developing for Android for the past 10 years, and for the past 2-3 years playing a lot with Kotlin multi-platform, and this year with Compose. Founder of GDG Coimbra, writing at Reander League, love to travel, photography, and running. And everyone says that this is the best beer here, Hot and Spills. Not sure if you agree, but if you're not, I'm really happy to go out and prove me wrong, please. I've created, as I was mentioning, a code lab. You can access it on this link. If you want to follow this afterwards, or if you want to following this while I'm trying to do the workshop. I've also created 2 projects that are directly linked to this code lab. It's available on my GitHub. And I also have a YouTube channel, so I probably do something like this. Don't forget to subscribe my channel, where I've been trying to create a couple of videos focused on Kotlin multi-platform and Compose, and how to share everything between Android, desktop, and hopefully the web. So we're going to fire up our Android Studio, and everyone knows that doing a live demo is going to create a lot of pressure. So let's hope that Murphy is on my side and everything is going to went well. And we're going to build this application. Basically, what it does is connect to the Unsplash API and retrieves the most trending images. I'm displaying it on a list. I can also search for a specific keyword, in this case, Portugal. And you can switch between screens with the bottom navigation. So it's a really simple application. I'm going to have a twist at the end, and you'll be really happy with it. So let's start some live coding. This is me right now. So I'm going to switch to Android Studio. This is the starter project that is on my GitHub, and it already has, to guarantee that there is no internet issues, I've already downloaded all the libraries, so I'm going to do this on offline mode. And you're going to add a couple of libraries, namely I'm using Compose, and I'm also going to use Coil Compose for image loading. And I've selected Coil mainly because it was one of the first ones that already supported Compose, and it worked pretty well since the beginning, so this was my choice for using Coil. And now I'm going to try to compile the application. I've got my emulator here, and this is what you're going to see. Yeah, a blank screen. This is the default colors. Basically, what's happening here is that I've got a main activity. Okay, now if you look directly to the main activity, we can already see a couple of differences. For instance, here we have the set content. And in XML, typically, when you have set content, you give it a layout resource. With Compose, you're going to send a composable function. And you can see that the import is totally different. We're going to access the set content from Android X activity Compose. Talking about this project, you might have noticed that I have here a shared library. This is because of spoilers. I'm going to share this code with the desktop. So basically, this folder contains all the access to my network, to the Unsplash API, and this is done with Ktor, so I can move this code to a shared model quite easily. It's really simple. Basically, I'm just going to fetch this data. Following this project structure, I have no layouts, which is great. And I have an Unsplash view model that basically is going to access my shared code. It's going to fetch images, and as soon as these images, basically I'm going to update the UI. But let's get back to the UI. So I have a main activity. I'm calling this about content that doesn't have anything. So let's start by adding some text. So there is a composable for text. I'm going to press Alt-Enter to automatically import it, and then I'm going to call text. And typically before, you do something like context.getString or getString directly. Now with Compose, you can access string resource. And then just going to import the class. Thank you. And then I'm going to access the string resource, and I want the about. Hello? OK. I'm going to call about text for this. String resource, it's similar to what we used to do before. Basically, it's going to access the resource from local contexts, okay? But this is now a composable function, so you can access directly with string resource. If now I'm going to compile the project, I'm going to see. Come on, Gradle. You can do this. Couple more seconds. You can see nothing, OK? You can't see nothing. And you can't see nothing because the default color for text, it's black. OK, so let's give it a color. I'm just going to set the color here as, oops. I'm going to set the color here as white. And now, if I'm going to compile the project once again, I'm going to see I'm going to be able to read something. Ah, nice. This is a showcase application built using Jetpack Compose that uses an Splash API. But we can do more things. Let's, for instance, add another text. So I'm going to add this time the text, the app name, for instance. And I'm going to set the color as red. And I'm seeing that I'm having a few glitches. So if now I'm compiling the project, I'm going to see that, wow, what happened? So basically, when you're adding composable functions, they're going to be added always on the same place, so the top left corner. So to avoid this, I think this might be too sensitive. OK, nice. To avoid this, I'm going to use, for instance, a column. Basically, a column will allow me to have these elements one after the other. So a column allows me to stack them vertically. And now if I'm going to run this, it's going to see one after the other. And of course, I could also use a similar component called row. And in this case, they're going to be displayed horizontally. Perfect. So let's get back to column. Just going to remove this. Yes. OK. If at first you don't succeed, call it version 1.0. So we're back with columns. So let's just remove this, and let's make this a bit prettier. So this is on the top. Let's imagine that I want to add this, for instance, on the middle of the screen. So there are a couple of things that I can do for this. First of one, column and basically all of the composable functions have a special type that's called the modifier, where you can do a lot of things. For instance, I'm going to say that it's going to fill the entire size. So this screen, this column, everything that I'm going to add this can be filled on the entire screen. And I want to do a couple more things. I want to center this text on the string, so I'm also going to call vertical arrangement and saying that I want this to be centered. And afterwards, I also want an horizontal alignment, and I'm going to say that I also want it to be centered. So if I'm doing things right, everything is going to be centered on the screen. Perfect. But I know that you're on the back, you are unable to read this, so I'm just going to increase a bit the font size. So I'm going to go here, and I'm going to say, for instance, 21 SPs. And now, next time that I'm going to show this, it's going to be bigger. I can also do a lot of things. For instance, opening the text here allows me to define the font size, color, style, white, family, the maximum line. So if I want to shorten the text, I can just define a number here. I can define how I want to be the text overflow. I can define almost everything. So let's close here text and get back to here. And what do I want to do? I'm going to want to align this. So I'm going to call text align. Yes. Third time's the charm. Let's see it. So I'm just going to call text align, and I'm going to say that I want it to be centered. And I also want to have some padding here, so I'm just going to grab this modifier, and I'm just writing padding. At any moment, this will update. OK. Alt-Enter. I've just set the padding, and we're going to see a couple of differences here. The text will be at the center, and I will have a small padding on the margins. Prettier, right? And we've seen how we were able to add text to our application. But there is more to it. So let's start, and let's create a second screen. I'm going to call it, there is an about content here. And I'm going to create the main content. And it's a file. And it's time, don't ask again. And I'm going to create a composable function now for the home content. So composable, fun, because we do have fun. I'm going to give this joke throughout this presentation. Home content. And this home content composable, it's going to be our first screen of the app. So I'm going to go back to main activity and change this about content to home content. Getting back to home content, and this home content is going to receive a set of images, and I want to display images here. So what I'm going to do before this is just create a new composable, and I'm going to call it add and splash image. And it's going to receive an image, and this image that it's going to receive, it's a custom image that I've created. So basically, this image mimics the response that I'm going to receive from the Unsplash API, and I'm going to use this information to add to my screen. So let's get over this Unsplash image. And now I want to add an image. So I've mentioned that I'm using coil for this. So basically, it's time to create a new composable. So I'm going to create a component, because what I want to do here, it's going to be reused throughout the project. So let me create a new Kotlin class. I'm going to call it image preview. And I'm going to, it's a composable, fun, and add image preview. And this add image preview is going to receive an URL, a string, and it's also going to receive a modifier. And this modifier, basically, it's going to be used for me to define the dimensions of this image and other parameters that I might think that it makes sense to add. So, modifier. Now that we have this, it's time to create our request. So, when we're going to load an image from a server, for instance, you always need to use an image request for this, in case you're using coil. So let's create the request. Image request, builder. It's going to receive a local context. And I'm going to define where this image should be loaded. So it's from the URL. I'm also going to define the crossfade because I don't want the image to just appear on the screen. I want a smooth transition. And then I'm going to make this build. Okay? Now that I have this request made, I want to use the image composable that Compose already gives me. So I need to create a painter for this. So I'm going to create it. And in this case, instead of creating a simple image painter, I'm going to use remember image painter. And I'm going to use remember image painter because when this image is fetched, I want to update my image composable. So you always need to use this remember, especially for that. So I'm going to add my request here. And now I have the painter. It's time to add an image. So I'm going to use here a new composable called box. This box, it's similar to the column and to the row, but the difference here is that I'm going to be able to overlay things. So what I want to do is, while I'm trying to fetch images, I want to show a default image on the background, and then when the image is fetched, I'm going to add the right image on top. I'm using a box, but I could be using, for instance, a surface. It's quite similar. So I'm going to add an image here. I'm going to define the painter. Just going to import image, Alt, Enter. And I'm going to, when you create an image, you always have to set, so close. You always have to set a content description. And the content description is used for accessibility, and it's mandatory that you define it. Although you can define it as null, don't do it. Always define what the content description should be. So content description, it's going to be string. Let me just check what happened here. It loaded the wrong image. Alt, Enter again. And I want the image from Android X, composable. No? OK. String resource. And I'm going to add my string for the content description. I'm going to import our file manually. There it is. So I'm going to import the description for the preview. So I've got my image defined. And I mentioned that I want to show something while I want to show something when the image is loading or when there was an error. So basically what I'm going to do is this painter has a specific state. So I'm going to access it when painter.state. And one of these states is loading, so is image painter.state.loading. And when the same state is, for instance, error. I know that you don't have image, but trust me, I'm going to go with error. I want to show another composable. So the composable that I want to add here is going to be add image preview empty. That's going to receive the modifier that I've sent before. And in case it's else, I'm just going to do nothing. OK, so it's time to define this add image preview. So I'm going to create a composable, fun add image preview empty, receives a modifier. And what I want to do here is to show an image on the background. So while the things are being loaded, I want to show something for the user to know that the application didn't stop, and it's going to do something on the background. So I'm going to start by creating a column here. And I'm going to say that it's going to be fill max size. And I want everything. And I want everything to be correctly aligned. So I'm going with, once again, vertical arrangement. And I'm going with center and horizontal arrangement, once again, with center. OK, perfect. And now that I've done this, I'm going to add a small surface, OK, with the modifier that I'm receiving. And a lot of times, surface have a default color. I don't want to see this black, for instance. So I'm going to define the color for the background of the surface as transparent. That's it. Now that I've defined where I'm going to draw the image, what I'm going to do is define the image itself. So I'm going, once again, using the image composable. I'm going to define a painter. And in this case, since the image is going to be local, I can basically access directly painter resource. And in this case, I'm going to use, for instance, the launcher for this. And the description can be string resource, r.string. There is a description already for when there is an error. I'm going to use this string. Once again, content description is really important in terms of accessibility. So use it, please. So we've got our image defined. What might I be missing? I'm missing the modifier that I've sent before. So I'm going to use it here, modifier. It's going to be the modifier that I've received. So we already have our image defined, but we're not sending images anywhere. So it's time to go back to our home content, main content. And I said that I'm going to fetch a set of images. So let's add a list here. So images, list image. And typically, when we're doing this with XML, we're going to create a recycler view, an adapter, a lot of XML files, and we'd end up writing a lot of code. And if we paid special attention to chat talk, well, I understood that writing code, it's bad because I'm going to add bugs. So let's try to do the less code possible. And Compose is great for this, because if I want to implement a list, I just need to do something like lazy column or lazy row if I want them to be horizontally. And I'm going to say that this lazy column, it's going to fill the entire screen, fill max size, and then I'm going to define the content for this lazy column. And here, I have different types of functions that I can use. I can have an item, or in this case, since it's a list, I'm going to use the set of items. So I'm going to send the images here. And basically, this is going to iterate over every image, so I can easily call now unsplash image with the image itself. Now that I've done this, I need to update this add and splash image. So let's get back here. So we've created the add image preview before. So it wants an URL. Let's go for regular. Since this can be null, I'm just going to send an empty string for this case. And the modifier that I'm going to define, it's going to be to fill the maximum width. But in terms of height, I just want it to be 200 dps, for instance. I have a lot of possibilities here. So let's also define that I want the image to have small rounded corners. So let's add a click and use rounded corner shape for this. And I'm going to give 8 dps, for instance. And of course, I want the background to be, let's say, our content secondary color. So I can add a small background to this. Just need to call color equals color content secondary and give it here. OK, so we've got our image preview done, but we're still not fetching the images. So let's get back to main activity. And now you can see that, wait, I'm missing something. I need to add the images that I'm going to receive. The way to do this is I've already have done unsplash view model. So let's create a variable for that. That's going to initialize it. And now I'm going to just fetch the most trending images, fetch images. And now I want to have these images. So I can use a really cool function called observe as state. And I'm going to do images It's going to be unsplash view model.images, and I'm going to call observer state. And this guarantees that every time there is an image update, I'm going to update images. So here, I'm going to send the parameter images. It's going to be image.value. Since this might be null, I'm just going to send an empty list for these cases. And now, if Murphy is on my side, I'm going to try to compile the project, and we should see a set of images. Who's confident with this? Oh boy. No images. So what did I do wrong? Let me just grab this emulator. So I'm missing something. Let's just debug it. So I've received the, now I know that I've received the images. I have here a new data available. Let's go over home content. I'm receiving here the list of images. I'm adding them here. I'm setting the background color, add image preview. I'm defining it here. So what I might be doing wrong. Let me just get back to here. Let me just check the URL. So I'm just going to call log. Let me just call add image preview. OK, I'm receiving the URL, so it might be something a bit different. Ah, come on. So I'm loading them. I'm adding it here. What I'm missing. OK, I'm not defining here a content scale, so let's just Yeah, do you know what I'm missing? I mentioned that I was sending a modifier, right? But I haven't added to the image itself. So basically, it's just using 0 as the dimension. So let's add the modifier right here. And now it should work. OK? Thank you. Well, this is not particularly pretty because images have different size. So we also have other things like content scale. Content scale. Thank you. Content scale. And we're going to use crop just to fill the entire screen. So the next time that we're going to run this, it's going to fill the entire screen. And we can do a lot of more things. For instance, let's try to create our image a bit more complex. So let's, for instance, add overlay over these images. So with the person that took this image and with a small description of this image. So for that, let's go back to main content. And we already have here this add image preview. And yes, and I want to add a surface because I want to overlay an overlay. So let's add a surface here. I also want to add a small padding, so this is not too close for the screen. Thank you. So this is not too close to the screen. I'm just going to add a small padding. So modifier.padding, and I'm going to add this start 16 dps. And end 16 dps, top equals 16. Top needs to be 8 dps, otherwise it's going to sum with the bottom for the next image. And once again, since this might have a defined color, I'm going to use color transparent. So let's just add this add image preview afterwards. And I've mentioned that I want to add an overlay. And I want to add this overlay because when I'm putting text over an image, I don't know what image I'm going to receive. So I might receive a white image, and since I'm setting white text, I won't be able to read it. So let's create a vertical brush. So this receives a list of colors. Let's go for color content, 20 transparency, and color content, 85 transparency. OK, we've already created our vertical brush. So it's now time to apply these backgrounds. For that, we're going to call a column, and we're going to set, once again, a modifier. And this modifier is going to follow the same dimensions set for the image. So I'm going to go with modifier, fill max width, modifier. And I'm going to set the height at 200 dps. And now I'm going to set the background as the brush that I've just defined. All good. So the next time I'm going to compile the application, I'm going to have a small overlay on top. This is really cool because you can see it on, you're going to see it on the orange image, so this is great. But I want to add more things. For instance, let's add the author's name. So I'm going to, once again, creating a column. And I'm going to create this column because I don't want the text to be near the corners. So I'm going to add a modifier here. And I'm adding here and not on the one that hits above, because that one is defining the background. And if I define the padding there, the background will have a small margin around the image. And I don't want that. So let's go for padding. I'm defining a padding. And I'm just going to add a text here. Just going to import it, Alt-Enter. And this is going to be the image description. And the font size, it's going to be a bit larger than usual, so everyone can read this. And this description might be null, so in that case, I'm going to send an empty string. And I'm going to choose the color accent. I'm also going to add the user, so let's just get over here and call user, and here the username, and let's put this a bit smaller. I mentioned before that we can do things like add max lines, so let's add a max line of 2 and an overflow with ellipses. Now let's compile the app, and let's see how everything looks. Pretty. Of course, we can do things a bit better. For instance, let's imagine that we want this to be aligned at the bottom. Once again, we could use vertical arrangement and say that we want it at the bottom, and the text would be automatically added to the bottom and not on the top, and would be a bit prettier. Thank you. So it's aligned at the bottom. So we've been adding, every time I need to define the text, I needed to define a text size, a text color, and a lot of things. So let's just use themes for that. Doing themes with Compose, it's really, really simple, because it almost does everything for us. So let's go over to the theme folder. And then let's create a new file called type. And this type, it's going to, I can mention that I have a better font than this one. I thought, well, let's customize this a bit. So there is a new font on the project, and I'm going to use Big Noodle Titling. If you want to know why I've selected this font, I have no clue. It was the first one when I searched for cool fonts on Google. And I believe it's cool. So let's fetch them. So let's go private vol. Let's call it Big noodle titling, font family, and let's create a font family with that. So we're going to create a font that's going to be r.font. Big noodle titling. Now that I have the font, it's time to define its size. So let's go and create font size large so everyone on the back can read this. Similarly to what we did with XML, we're going to use SP for fonts and DP for sizes. So let's go over here and create medium and small. So medium might be 17, if I'm not mistaken. And going with small, it's going to be 15. OK, now that we've created this size and everything is on this type file, I'm going to create the typography for this. So let's create a typography. And this is going to be a typography itself. And this needs to be the composed one. So basically, typography has a set of styles already defined, H1, H2, H3, a lot of them. I'm going to just customize a couple of ones. So I'm going to go with H1, create a text style. And I'm going to say that the color, it's the color accent. And the font family, it's the font family that I've just created. So it's going to be big noodle font family. The font weight, in this case, it's going to be bold. And the font size, it's going to be medium. So I'm going to do the same thing for H2 and H3. With the only difference between, I'm going to use regular for this, normal for this. And I'm going to change the size for small. And here we're going to use large. With this done, basically I can go back to my project. So I'm going to go back to main content. And since I have here the font size defined as 17 SPs and the color as accent, I can just go over this and create text style. And I'm going to set the style as typography H1. And here it's going to be H2. And don't forget that we have an about screen. So let's go over about content and call it here H3. If we're now going to compile the app, we're going to see that it's going to load a new font. I love when this works at the first time. So we already have the fonts defined, but there is a lot more things that we can do. For instance, we might create themes. And we can easily create themes now. Basically, let's go over here. And go here, create a new file called theme. OK, let's try it. If anyone is looking for Mac ports, we can say the ones that do not work. OK, cool. Thank you. So I was saying, OK, let's create a theme file in this case. And we're just going to create a really simple theme, light and dark only. So let's create a file called theme. And here, we're going to create a dark color palette and a light color palette. For that, we're going to go with private val, dark color palette. And there is already one defined. And we could override a lot of things. I'm just going to override the background here. So the background, it's going to be color content. And I'm also going to define on background. That means that the text that it's on the background, so it needs to be a different color. Otherwise, I won't be able to see anything. So on background, it's going to be color accent. And I'm defining the dark one. I'm also going to define the light one, which is going to be the opposite of this one. So I'm just going to exchange values here. And I have the palettes defined. So it's time to create the theme itself. I'm going to create a theme here, and I know that I'm really inspired in names, so I'm going to call it Unsplash theme. And I'm going to define an argument here called dark theme that basically what it's going to do is just look at its system in dark theme. That in turns, what it does, it looks at the UI mode. So it checks the setting. If it's enabled, it's going to say it's dark theme. Otherwise, it's going to say that it's light. So let's get back to theme.kt. And of course, I need to receive the content. So this content, it's going to be the main screen at this moment. So in this case, it's a composable. And now that we're receiving everything, let's create our theme. So first, I need to check what it's enabled. So if dark theme is enabled, I'm going to use the dark color palette. If it's light theme instead, I'm going to use so close, the light color palette. Now that we've done this, we can just define these special arguments on material theme. And we're going to send the colors, the typography that we've created before. Exactly. We also have a set of shapes defined that are usually created when you create a project, so we're just going to set them also. And of course, the most important part, we need to send the content, so what's need to be rendered. Since we've created this new theme, this Unsplash theme, we need to update our UI. For that, we're going to go to main activity and call Unsplash theme. So I'm just going to remove this and sending this as content. Great. Now that I have this defined, I need to update the background, for instance, for my list view. For that, let's go over home content. And the lazy column, of course, has a modifier background. And this background, it's going to look at material theme and colors and, as I mentioned, background. Now, if I'm going to run the project, what you're going to see is drum roll. The exact same thing. And you're going to see the exact same thing because the dark mode, it's the one that it's enabled right now. So let's go over here to settings. And in settings, we're going to switch for the light mode. So light mode is on, and going back to the app, you see that it automatically loads the white background. So now this is using the system's default, so it's going to be easily updated. So we're done with themes. And there is another important thing that I need to mention. There is, OK, we've created two screens, but we're just showing one. So we want to show the about content once again. So what we can do to this, it's let's create a new file called main screen. And of course, we're going to create a composable called fun main screen. It's going to receive a set of images, list image. And here, I'm going to use a component that it's basically a skeleton. It's basically a skeleton for that screen. So it's called scaffold. If you're coming from the web, this is already used a lot. So if you look at this scaffold, basically it has all the things that usually a screen has. So you can see it has the floating action button, it has a snack bar, the bottom bar, the top bar, the drawers, everything. So you just need to send the composables for this, and the screen will be automatically designed, like magic. So let's start by creating the content. So we want to show content. So we want to show the main content that we were sending before, home content. and we're going to send the images on home content. Okay? And I mentioned that I want to add a bottom bar to show the other screen, but I also want to show a top bar. So to do this, we can just call top bar. And who knew there is a top up bar that we can use, composable that we can use. Basically, you just need to define the title here. Okay. And to define the title, what you need to do is just use, once again, a text. So let's go with, let's just import this with Alt-Enter. And the text is going to be a string resource. We're going to import the app name as the text to be shown. So let's just let's going to go with app name, and we're going to go with the style of our typography. So let's go with H2. And of course, since before we've now added the concept of themes, let's use on background for this. So we're going to access material theme, and then we're going to use colors and on background. Of course, the top up bar also has a background that you can set. So let's set it. Top up bar, it's here. So let's define this background. That's going to be the material theme colors dot background. And because I don't want to have elevation, I don't want a shadow, let's just define this as 0 dps. If you now compile the project, before that, we need to update this to home screen, main screen. But if you now compile the project, you're going to see a top bar. Nice. Oops, it could be a bit bigger, so let's go for H1 or H3. So main screen, let's go for H3. So we've now defined a top-up bar, but we also want to define a bottom bar. So for that, let's just define one. So we're going to go to here and define the bottom bar. And when you want to define a bottom bar, it's to switch from one tab to the other. So the first thing that we need to do is to define what should be shown on a tab. So I want to show an icon, I want to show a label. So let's create a new class for this. I'm going to call it bottom navigation screens. And this is going to be a sealed class that it's going to receive a route. This route is similar to a tag that you used to use on XML. And with this, we're also going to receive a string resource that we're going to call string res ID. And of course, we also want to show an icon, so let's call it drawable res and drawable res ID. And now let's just create our object. So object home is going to be called bottom navigation screen. It's going to use home. There is a string for this, so it's going to be our string dot I'm just going to call, so this is home, navigation home, and I'm going to use the drawable IC home, and now I'm going to create the about one. So I'm just going to use strings and drawables for this. And I already defined what needs to be shown on this bottom navigation bar. Now that this is done, and we're going to use Android X navigation library for this, we're going to define a nav controller. This nav controller is going to be used, so when the user presses another tab, it can navigate from one screen to the other. So going back to main screen, we're going to define a nav controller here, val nav controller. We're going to use the remember. You need to use the remember, otherwise it won't update. And we don't need to define anything. We just need to define the bottom bar here. So let's just define the bottom navigation items. It's going to be a list of bottom navigation, screen home, and about. And now that we've defined what should be shown, let's just create this main bottom bar, and we need to create this class, but it's going to receive the navigation controller, and it's going to receive this list of items. So I mentioned that I need to create a new class for this. This new class, it's going to create the tab element itself. So let's just go to new and create a main bottom bar file. And let's create a composable for that. So I'm just going to create a composable. Thank you. Main bottom bar. Nav controller, it's the controller that you're going to receive. We're going to receive a list of items to show. And that's it. Now, there is a navigation component that we can use for this. So we're going to call bottom navigation. And this bottom navigation can receive a background color. So since we are already using themes, just let's define this background color as, once again, material theme. .colors.background. Also, we need to know when we want to show different colors when the user clicks on the other tab. We want to show different colors when the user clicks on the other tab, so we need also to remember what was the initial tab selected and what's going to happen when the user clicks on the other tab. So let's just create a selected index for this. This is going to be a mutable state, int. And let's just initialize this selected index here by remember mutable state of 0. Since we have multiple tabs to add, we can just call items.forIndexed. And it would automatically do everything. And in order, let me just check if a variable is selected or not. So is selected, it's going to be selection index dot value if equals to the index that's currently selected. OK. So it's time to add, finally, our bottom navigation item that receives a selection to know if it's selected or not. So we can just call directly is selected. And it receives a one click. So I need to say when I click on that tab, what should happen. But before we go into this on click, let me just define that I want to show an icon. So I'm going to call here icon and say that I'm going to use an icon. I'm going to use an icon, painter resource. Once again, I'm going to create a painter resource with just going to import here R directly. So I'm going to use as the icon this bottom navigation string and send the drawable res ID. And I'm also going to set the content description to be the same. So this is going to be string resource, and I'm going to set the bottom navigation screen dot string res ID. So what it didn't like. OK, now it's working. Always a comma. So I also need to add a label for this. So similar as we did before, a label, it just adds a small text for this. So I'm going to go with text. I'm going to set the string resource as r.string as the bottom navigation screen and call string res ID. Just going to import text with Alt-Enter at any moment. Thank you. And I'm going to define the style. It can be typography.h1, for instance. I'm also going to define a set of things. For instance, I want to automate. I don't want to care to change the color. So I want the system to do this by itself. So I'm going to define a selected color. There is an argument for that, selected content color. And this is going to be color primary. And in case it's not selected and selected, it's going to be color accent. When I click on a different tab, of course, I want to call, and if it's not selected, I want to just update the selected index. Selection index.value, it's going to be now the new index. And I'm going to say that the navigation controller should navigate to the next option. So it's going to navigate to the bottom navigation screen route. OK, nice. We've just defined how we want things to look. Nevertheless, if we go back to the main screen, you can see that we're always setting the same content. The same content, it's home content. And we need to update this with a nav host in order to select a different screen to load. So to do this, let's get to import nav host. It receives a nav. I've imported the wrong one. It receives a nav controller. This initial destination, I'm going to put it here hard-coded, but you should create a variable for this. Home.route. And it's going to load a composable. In case it's a bottom navigation screen home.route, it's going to load home screen. And in case we're selecting the about content, it's going to load about content. Now, if we're compiling the app, it should show the top-up bar with a bigger size, and it should show a bottom navigation bar. Almost there. So there are a couple of things here. The first one is that I'm going to change this to black so you can see it better. First one, I'm not using the material theme on this. But the most important thing here is that you can see that the text itself didn't change the color. Although if I'm now clicking on the other one, it will update the icon. The selection wasn't applied the color. And it wasn't updated because when we've defined the style to use, this style, H1, already sets a color. It already has a color accent. So if we create a new style, let's just remove the color and get back here. And now, when the application compiles, this is just to give suspense. And now, when the application, see? Now, when the application compiles, you'll see that this is going to be easily updated. So everything now is working fine. Since we're talking about Compose, I think it makes sense to also show you how you can add text and interact with that text. So for that, we're going to use a text field. So let's get back. I'm just going to close all of these tabs. And let's get back to main content. And in main content, let's add a new component. I'm going to use a new item for this. And I'm going to call it add search field, and it's going to receive an action that we're going to define later on today. So perfect. It's red, don't worry. I'm going to just define this add search field. So now that we've defined this search field, fun add search field receives one search action that receives a string that we're going to use for search. Perfect. Now that we've defined this, in order to use a text field, and I'm going to use an outline text field just because it creates a smooth outline around the text field. If we add outline text field, you'll see that it receives a value, and it has also another argument. It's on value changed. So basically, I need to define these two values at least, these two arguments at least. And for that, I'm going to use search. Once again, I need to use remember. Otherwise, this component won't be updated. So what we're going to do here, remember, mutable state. Initial value is going to be an empty string. And I'm going to set it here. And every time the user adds a new character, I want to update this search field. So the search value, it's going to change to the new one that was received. So to create a basic outline text field, you just need to do this. But of course, we want to create a lot more. So let's just define this to be full size, full width, fill max width. Of course, we're all designers, so I'm also going to define a small padding here. I don't want to merge anything. We also have the chance to define placeholder, for instance. Once again, to define a placeholder is similar to define on edit texts. Back in the XML days, we had that int. Basically, the placeholder, it's the exact same thing, so let's use text for this. We're going to use a string resource. And we're going to use, just going to manually import the R file. I've just imported the R file, and I'm just going to add it here, so r.string.hint. We also have styles defined, so let's take advantage of them. And I'm going to use typography h3. And of course, since we now support themes, let's just define a material theme color for this. So this needs to be on background, and it's already defined a placeholder. There are a lot more arguments that you can use. For instance, there is also a leading icon that we can use to define. So you can just create an icon for this. Painter, it's going to be a painter resource. This painter resource, it's going to receive a drawable. In this case, I'm going to use search. Once again, don't forget your content description. So let's just access string resource and call rstring.description search. And that's it. So we saw before that we were receiving a search action here on search action. And I want, basically, when the user presses a specific key, the EMA key, I want to trigger that action. So first, I will need to define that keyboard action. So I'm going to call keyboard options. And I'm going to say that keyboard options, it's going to use the default. And I just want to change the EMA action. So it's going to use the EMA action then. And then I want to define a keyboard action. So when the user clicks on that key, I want to trigger on search event. So for that, we're going to use keyboard actions. And what it's going to do, it's called onSearch action with the search result. With the search field. OK. So we're saying that this search needs to be done, but we didn't define it before. So let's go to add this to all the previous classes. So it should receive here on search action. Home content, it's called by main screen. That's going to receive also an on search action at any moment. I have time for a sip. I've added the on search action here. So I'm also going to add here on home content when it's created. And now I'm just going to open main activity that calls this main screen, and I'm going to define this on search action to be a topic. It's going to call the unsplash view model dot search for a topic, and hopefully everything will work at first. It works. So I'm just going to see if this works. I'm just going to search for Portugal, for instance, my hometown. I'm going to click on search, and immediately I'm going to see a lot of pictures from Portugal. Real nice when everything works. I can do a lot of things. For instance, this is using the default color as pink version of it. I can define how it should behave when I've created the focus. I can create a lot of things with this. So before we end, I just want to get back to the slides. Much better now. And I want to tell you that there are a couple of libraries that already provide you a lot of things when you use Compose. The best set of libraries was initially created by Chris Baines, and they are the Accompanist libraries. They are now under com.google, Accompanist, and they give you almost everything for free. If you want to use swipe to refresh, you just need to call swipe to refresh, give the content, define which should be the refresh action, and with 5 lines of code, you also have access to everything. You will be able to pull down and search for new things. Another cool thing here is, for instance, on Android 11, we had the concept of EME keyboard, so you could animate the keyboard. You can now control the keyboard. Thanks to these libraries, you have this support back to API 21. A big question that perhaps some of you may ask is now that we have the Android application, how easy it is to make a desktop application since we have Compose multi-platform. So Android, Wear, Desktop, and Web. So basically, we created this Android application. And I've created an entire project thinking that I want to share this code. So all the business logic, all the access to the network are being done with Ktor, which is multi-platform. And basically, I can easily reuse that code with multi-platform. And I'm also going to share this Compose code that I can use on Android and desktop and a small part the web. So this is Android app that you just saw. I've also last week, Alpha 8 of Android Wear was supported, so I've got it here. Nice. I basically ported all the code to Wear, and I also have the same thing for the desktop. So basically, in terms of desktop, you can reuse most things. Doing the same thing for web, it's not as easy as one might think, but it's still possible. So this is the web app also working. Some notes, I'm saying that you can do this, but there are a lot of things that are a bit complex. For instance, you have access to this Unsplash project. And if I'm switch And if I'm switch, wait. And if I'm switching to another repository that you have on the Code Lab, you can see that you've got all the projects here. So you've got the Android app that what it does have, it's like only a main activity. I'm just defining the theme here. And basically, all the code is being shared between Android and the desktop app. Doing the same thing for just opening for showing you. So basically, the desktop app uses the exact same thing, and all the code is in a shared library that you've got here called shared UI. And basically, I need to define a couple of things. For instance, well, icons are on different folders, but all the code is being shared. The only thing that I needed to do was to define images. In this case, the top-up bar, because I want it to look a bit different on Android. And I've defined the icons using the expect actual that multi-platform already gave us. Doing the same thing for the web, it's a bit more trickier. So the web app, basically, you still need to use divs. And although you can create expect actuals for everything, it's really more tricky to do this. So you need to still program up key you're doing for the web with styles, font size, working with absolute and relative positions, and so on. Hopefully, one day, this will be all under the same composable, so you can just share it across all platforms. So what challenge you're going to find when you're sharing everything on all targets? First, and for me this was the worst one, the setup is still quite challenging. So if we're going to do the same things for Android, we're going to use the Compose version, but JetBrains has their own Compose version. So basically what they did was when you apply that plugin, it will automatically replace one version to the other, so you can still use it on your shared UI. So this is going to take you a bit of time, but at this moment it's worth it. Libraries depend on the Compose version. So this happened to me. I was using Kotlin 1.5.30, and then there was a new version of Compose, and it wasn't compatible with that version of Kotlin, so I needed to downgrade the Kotlin version for that. The same thing happens when you use the Compose version by JetBrains. The big problem here is now that you have Compose for Android, Compose from JetBrains, and then the Kotlin version there. So there is a new layer that you need to take care about. Also, not all the features are available for desktop and the web. For instance, there's still no direct support for localization. There are a couple of libraries that try to do this. For instance, the Moco resource already does this, but you don't have access, for instance, for live data, view models, etc. Happily, or fortunately, we have a really cool community that's building this. And if we look once again at our project, you're going to see that I've got a couple of libraries here that are already give me that functionality. One of them is called the pre-compose that allow me to have live data on the desktop. Also, accompanies libraries were created for Android. Once again, fortunately, the community created these libraries also for the desktop. And I needed to add it here because the desktop version doesn't compile for Android. And since I want to share all the code, basically what I needed to do was saying, OK, you're going to compile this for Android and the GVM, and everything works. Finally, the web is still on its initial stages. Most of this works pretty well with Android and desktop. But when you try to do the same things for the web, there are a really lack of libraries to it, basically because they are trying to focus first on stability, and only after that we're going to have those libraries. So my advice is start with Android and desktop, and only if you have a lot of time, try to go to the web. I also want to show you something. I've mentioned that the initial setup, it's quite hard to have everything ready. So I've tried to create a template for this, because this happened to me a lot. So I created a template called Alicerce. This in Portuguese means foundation. And basically, it's allowed me to create a shared code and shared UI for Android and desktop quite easily. Basically, what I need to do, this is the project itself. You just need to call cookie cutter and automatically define a set of parameters for this. Basically, it asks you for the project name, the package name, and you'll create a project with everything that you need to share your logic code and your UI code between Android and desktop. Of course, it's open to feedback. It's on my repository, and I'm also happy for any contribution on how I can improve this. A couple of resources. Perhaps the most resource that you can see it, watch all the DroidCon videos related with Compose. We had awesome, cool talks about Compose. And of course, this is also another list from the web from people developing for Compose that are creating samples. They're always updating to the latest version of Compose. And go grab the Jorge Castilho book, because it's really good. I think it's supported by Snap until the end of this month. So go grab it. And thank you all. Do you have any question? I think we still have a couple of minutes for questions.